The year is 52 BC. 5 long years. The Roman Republic has been at war with itself. The seas are full of warships, and the streets of Rome run red with blood. And then there's Julius Caesar, skipping merrily through the chaos and conquering half of Europe. But why? Why is he doing that? Let's find out. This is Rise of Rome. Rome has never been more fractured than it is in the late 1st century BC. Civil wars have nearly become commonplace with the last 3 decades, seeing 2 major conflicts, and another against the rising power of the Eastern Mediterranean, Mithridates VI. But these were conflicts of Rome versus another state. Nothing compared to the level of discord that was ripping apart the very fabric of the Roman Republic. In 88 BC, 2 men who were once allies, Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Gaius Marius, became bitter rivals after both laid claim to the consulship, the highest office in Roman politics. Eventually Sulla won, but not without starting a brutal civil war and killing thousands of his fellow Romans. Marius' supporters took their revenge when he went to war by having him declared dictator, essentially giving him sole control over the government and military while he crushed those who supported Sulla. After securing his power, Marius did what dictators do and had his name written on everything from coins to statues to obelisks. He kicked off a series of reforms that changed Rome forever, creating a professional standing army instead of relying on citizen levies for soldiers and seizing lands held by the wealthy elite and redistributing them among the poor. The end result was an army that was much more loyal to Rome than to any patron, and a populace that was no longer reliant on the generosity of the elites to survive. It would be a mistake to call Marius a populist or a socialist, though, because all of the land he seized was given to the people but remained under his control. In fact, during his 2nd term as a dictator, he started yet another civil war by kicking the allies of Rome out of their holdings in Asia Minor. Sulla eventually returned to Rome and defeated Marius, executing him and thousands of his supporters. As he got older, though, Sulla's health began to decline and his grip on power weakened, leading to another period of civil war. A former general of Marius named Gaius Norbanus was made dictator, but he was defeated by the forces of Sextus Pompey. Meanwhile, a young general named Gnaeus, known today as just Pompey, was gaining fame for himself by crushing rebellions in the provinces of Hispania and the Roman East. By 71 BC, he had defeated Sertorius and returned to Rome as a hero. 2 years later, he was elected consul, along with his father, Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo, and set about returning the Republic to its former glory, with the help of a few friends, including the aforementioned Julius Caesar. Pompey defeated and executed the remnants of Marian opposition, bringing an end to the decade of civil wars. But just as it seemed as if Rome might return to peace, the Senate gave Caesar the task of conquering the Gauls, a group of tribes in modern-day France and northern Italy. Caesar was only 30 years old at this time and had so far distinguished himself with his victories over Helvetii and Bellovaci. His task was simple: go to Gaul and conquer it. But like most things in life, it wasn't quite that easy. Caesar divided Gaul into 3 sections: the coastal region, the lowlands around the Seine River, and the interior. Each area had its own distinct culture, but they were united by the fact that they were ruled by local chieftains, not kings, and therefore had never been conquered by Rome before. The coastal tribes were the easiest to subjugate thanks to their love of luxury goods. All Caesar had to do was make a few good first impressions, and the locals loved him. In fact, they enjoyed Caesar's company so much that he was kept busy for a whole year in this part of Gaul, simply attending festivals and banquets. Caesar was polite, however, and did ensure that the chiefs of the coastal regions agreed to pay tribute to Rome and allow Roman merchants to operate freely within their territories. The second region was much more difficult to subdue, since the Gauls here lived mostly off of agriculture and didn't care much for Roman finery. They were also well organized militarily, making them dangerous opponents. Still, Caesar managed to defeat them in battle and force them to submit to Roman rule. The real challenge came from the interior, where the Gauls were split into several independent tribes. There was one, however, that stood head and shoulders above the others: the Belgae, fierce warriors who hadn't yet been defeated by Rome. Caesar engaged them in battle and realized too late that he had made a terrible mistake. The Belgae were living up to their fearsome reputation and were beating back Caesar's legions. While his cavalry was holding their own, the infantry were getting massacred. It was the worst defeat of Caesar's career. Determined to avenge his fallen soldiers, Caesar marched back into Belgium and defeated the Belgae in the Battle of the Sabas River. From there, he chased them down and killed their chief Ambiorix, ending the last major rebellion in Gaul. The entire province was now Roman. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar wrote a book about his campaigns in Gaul called Commentaries on the Gallic War. In it, he details how many miles he marched each day, how many tribes he defeated, and how much land and treasure he acquired for Rome. But the truth is that none of that is important. If you read carefully, you can see how much Caesar grew as a person during his time in Gaul. At first, he's formal, polite even. He writes about how he attended festivals and banquets, and how he always tried to make a good first impression. By the end of his campaign, However, he's cold and calculating. He writes about how he tricked and betrayed his enemies, and how he never let his guard down. In fact, he even admits that he's responsible for some of the deaths of friendly leaders. By the end of his campaigns, Caesar had become the perfect Roman general, ruthless, cunning, and utterly ambitious. But while Caesar was busy taking over new lands for Rome, back in Rome, people were unhappy. To be fair, most of Rome was pretty happy with Caesar's conquests. Life was better for a Roman merchant who could now sell his wares all across Gaul. It was also great for the poor, who, thanks to Marius, had more land than they knew what to do with. But there was a large segment of the population who hated Caesar and wanted him dead. And it all came down to money. You see, according to Roman law, any spoils of war had to be registered in Rome before redistribution. This meant that Caesar had to bring his treasure back to Rome for approval before he could actually use it. The problem was that he had spent the last 5 years marching through Gaul, subsisting off of nothing but the goodwill of the local tribes. He had no money and therefore no way to repay his soldiers. Of course, he could have just ignored the law and distributed the spoils himself, but that would have been breaking the law. So instead, he brought the matter to the Senate. Now, usually, this would have been a good move. Caesar was popular in Rome and the Senate couldn't risk angering him. But at this particular moment, the Senate had enough power to ignore Caesar, and they did. They rejected his request to redistribute the spoil of Gaul, and instead, forced him to pay back the money he owed his soldiers out of his own pocket. Now, you might think that this wouldn't be a big deal for Caesar. After all, he was a rich man, right? Well, yes, but that was precisely the point. The Senate wanted Caesar to be ruined financially. Once he paid back his soldiers, he would have no money left and thus no power. Without his wealth, he could easily be controlled by the Senate, ending his political career. Of course, Caesar didn't take this lying down. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of war against Rome, and marched on the city. After defeating a coalition of senators in battle, he entered Rome as a conqueror and executed those he deemed traitors to the Roman Republic. From there, he launched a series of military campaigns that extended the Republic all across Europe and North Africa, as well as into the Middle East. By the end of his life, Rome was 8 times larger than it had been when Caesar took over. To learn how Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, would turn Rome into an empire, watch our video on the rise of Augustus. Or to get a broader view of the Roman Republic, try our video on the Punic Wars.